Hello, it's Peter Merrick, a Canadian who is in San Diego, and I feel so honored because I'm having a discussion right now that I want to share with all of you. It is with Matt Barrett, and he is of the Rising Tide Foundation and the Canadian Patriot Review. He actually looks at history with a different prism that's useful. And the reason I like doing these videos, because I think it's important that we have to go and gain as much knowledge as possible, because what we were taught might not be the truth. And a few months ago, I wrote an article and I asked myself a really simple question: why I believe what I believe. And there was no reason not to believe it unless there was a problem in the system. And now we all have to learn as quickly as possible to be able to apply it to the events that are happening. And these are events that none of us, well, I have never experienced in my life. I feel privileged that I haven't. However, I also feel a responsibility for my children, for your children, because there's no future for your children. There's no future for my children. Matt, can you share with us a little about your background? Because I'm really, I've been watching you everywhere.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the conversation, and I'm looking forward to our chat. And especially the introductory remarks. I mean, the idea of really empowering people to understand the lessons of history so that we don't repeat them, but not only that, that we can actually correct the errors that previous generations have made when society went sour. And in some ways, it's a bit of a miracle that we're here today even having this conversation, which, when you consider the fact that there have been very powerful networks and conspiracies run by very, very sociopathic forces for a very long time, long before you and I were even born, it's quite astounding that humanity has been able to rally itself in moments of crisis and create solution concepts when it was really needed to avoid collapsing into a dark age. So the fact that there have been sacrifices made by previous generations, which many times when you start looking at real history, history as it actually happened, not as we are told it happened, but really as it happened, you start realizing that the greatest personalities, individuals who gave their lives for the ideals and their morality and their conscience of what humanity was, have been written out of our history, have been slandered, so that we don't properly have communion with the people like John F. Kennedy. We don't listen to his speeches. We don't study his policies. We don't look at the fight. We don't look at the deep state operation that JFK himself had to deal with, or his brother, or people like Franklin Roosevelt, or people like Warren Harding, or Canadians, people like Daniel Johnson Sr., the Premier of Quebec, who died very mysteriously in 1968. We don't really study his speeches, or Paul Sauvé, the great nation builder who also died after 4 months in power in Quebec in 1959. We don't have an education system which encourages us to go to source material, read their speeches, read the microfilms, listen to their speeches where possible, study their policies. So because of that, we're stuck like lemmings moving towards a cliff, repeating things and mistakes that should not be repeated by even the dumbest of the people of the world, So what I want to do, in the course of our conversation is, and I'll address your question for myself. My big wake up call was in 2003 when I was studying in fine arts. I was making a documentary with a team of people in school. Part of it involved doing some work on 9/11. I was what you might call a radical normie. Didn't really have much of a sense of identity politically or anything. I just wanted to make fun cartoons and fun videos. But in the course of doing some of my research, you stumble across things that are disturbing and that confront you with the ugly fact that history is very different. And I was thinking, well, if it is the case that something has taken control of the governments of the West, the USA, Canada, that was willing to commit something as atrocious as 9/11, killing its own people to justify what became, a police state operation, mass surveillance, the bombing of countries around the world, killing millions of people who are innocent in the Middle East. All of these things were the consequence, and that was intended. If something so criminally sociopathic and powerful could take control, this didn't happen overnight. This means everything I've been looking at my history is wrong. And so that put me on a new course in life of really just trying to obsessively piece things together. For a couple of years, I volunteered.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
You a question?
Yes.
Because one of the things that's happened to me and many people that I know who've had a wake up moment, like a real wake up moment, because everything that you thought just doesn't make sense. And you have to have a memory. Because if you have a memory, that's the key, to remember, no, that's not the way it is. That's not the way it happened. Most people go into real darkness when they realize that everything that they thought was true and every organization that they had trusted goes into a dark place. That happened to you when you realize that it's sort of like the prisoner in the cave who sort of leaves, and then he feels a need to go back to tell the other prisoners what he's seen. However, it's a lonely experience. Share what that was like, because I think a lot of people would be listening to this. That is such a powerful experience. I just want to share with you. Next week, I'm speaking with Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace. I was good friends. Yes, Greenpeace. I was good friends with Bob Hunter, and Bob was very generous to me when I was young, on a television program he had in Toronto. I am speaking with Patrick because he talks about viruses. He also talks about carbon being invisible and how we scared people, and anti-humanism. The part that I'm interested in with Patrick is, how did he survive? Everybody around him turned on him. And the ironic thing was this: he was the only person in Greenpeace who had actually lived in nature, because his family came from several generations of loggers. Plus, he was the only scientist. And he also told me something else which sticks in my mind. He said Bob was like everyone else. They were an urbanite. So urbanites were telling people how to live, who never even gone out into nature or lived in nature. So that wake up call for you, walking through that dark night, like what was that like when you started digging? You said, oh my God. And then who could you talk to? Because other people say, well, what does that matter? Who cares? And you're crazy.
Well, I think therapeutically speaking, at the time it helped to be able to write a lot. So I at least had the habit of wanting to get my thoughts out of my head that I was struggling with as I was researching and writing. So that writing process, it makes the entire learning experience less passive, more active, more about writing my own questions down. If I'm struggling with to answer a problem regarding history, the grand conspiracies, even things of, you soon find yourself dealing with human nature, matters of a philosophical nature, because at the end of the day, the oligarchy that has maintained a continuity of existence for many, many generations has itself a coherent, internally consistent, organized philosophy of what they believe the nature of human beings are, that they want to control or keep in the cave, as creatures that would be endowed to, or predestined to believe only in the shadow impressions cast by the puppeteers, as the Plato cave allegory that I think you alluded to. They have a certain view that they're committed to almost religiously of an anti-humanism, that they believe human beings are a certain thing, a certain way. And if human beings think that they're not a certain way, we have to break them into becoming convinced that they are in fact the way, what we tell them to be. And also that also implies a certain cosmology, a certain idea of, it's not like they're completely atheistic. At the end of the day, there is a certain cosmology, a theism, but that they believe that they are participating in, except that it is sort of the very inversion of what is moral, just, and reasonable. So if you read the writings of people like Albert Pike and his Morals and Dogma, for example, I had a friend of mine who was a lower level Freemason, but he was a collector, and we did a trade. I did a painting of his family, and in exchange, he sent me an original copy from this was an 1893 edition that I still have. So I read that early on in my research, because I'm like, well, do they really have, does this elite actually have secrets known only to the inner initiates? Is that real, or are they deluding themselves? What is it? So I wanted to read their writings. So I read at least the last degrees of initiation from the last um, 8 or 9
The
chapters.
32nd.
Yeah, I went from like
32nd degree.
22 to 32, and then you get the 33 obviously when you drink the baby blood or something. And you're but it gave me a clear-headed sense by reading Pike that they are Luciferian. You know, he does define God as being clearly Lucifer, the god of light, and in his messed up Manichaean philosophy that has been going, this goes back to ancient days of Greece and Egypt. Before that, there's a continuity. There's an idea that there's an equal balance of light and darkness, and that the god of the Christian, Adonai as he calls them, is the evil god, and the god of Lucifer is the slandered god, who's actually the good one, that they all convince themselves they have to harmonize with and become instruments of. And everything becomes this world of shadow and light in a Manichaean balance, that darkness has an actual force to it. Light, you know, that's equal to good. And not only that, more powerful than good, in the sense that good only exists when there is evil. So in that sense, evil is the cause of the good. So they get into this weird cosmology. And in that
like
world,
Seth and Horus, right? Like evil.
yeah, well, it's like the Janus thing too, you know, the multi, you know, the two-faced Janus. Seth and Horus is another example of light and darkness. Yeah, so it manifests itself in different cultural clothing, but it's the same ultimate thing, you know. Apollo Dionysus, you know, that was one of the key organizing cults in Greece too. You know, you're this Kantian, Apollonian figure in the daytime, doing your duty, right, whipping yourself into good behavior, and then at night you worship at the temple of Dionysus, and you go into your drug-filled orgies. Or, you know, Bacchus is another name for it. So you have this.
What was it? The temple of Apollo, where like you're 40 years old, you would go there and they have sacred prostitutes, where you'd be there for a year.
Yeah, exactly. yeah. Well,
and
that
it didn't go away.
No, it didn't go away.
None of this stuff. None of this. But one thing you mentioned that I just want to dwell upon it, because when you're saying that they have certain rules, and the one thing that I find really eerie. It has to do with consent, because no one I know was ever forced them to do anything. They just followed along. They basically could have said no and not participated in this madness in the last, let's say, 2 years. And I'm going to liken this to 2 examples, practical, since most of the people are going to be watching this are on LinkedIn. My parents took me into Canada Trust, which is now TD, when I was a little kid, and opened up a bank account. I ended up finding in a box, my father was a CPA and he was very organized. And I found in the box like the form, and I'm reading it, and it said that I had 6 months to go and renounce whatever my parents had signed me up to after I turned age of consent, 18. So basically, the information's given to us, and if you do nothing, it's almost like we've given consent. And the other example I will use is with my daughters. My daughters were born in Toronto. However, their mother is American. My wife went to the consulate and got them their citizenship. She thought she needed to do it. It says, and my expertise is cross-border planning between Canada and the States. At age 18, the child has to make the decision whether they're going to renounce their U.S. citizenship or they're going to be responsible for taxes and whatever other responsibilities, if there's a draft or whatever, to the United States. Most people don't know this, but they don't care about ignorance. If it's out there, it's your responsibility, exactly what you did, Matt, to go and find that information. And if someone chooses not to, it doesn't really matter whether you read the contract or not. You still signed it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about being a citizen versus a subject, I think. You know, if you think about the deeper philosophy of being a citizen means that you have a personal responsibility to go above and beyond what is expected of you. You can't just be somebody who calibrates to whatever is normal in your society, because what if your society falls into corruption, decadence, decay, and what's normal, right, it becomes really mediocre to the point of being borderline evil? are you going to just adapt to that just to like fit in? And, no. That's why God gave us a conscience to also use with our minds, not just logic to try to like, come up with intellectual constructions to get ahead or make money for our whatever. I mean, so the question of a citizen is not to be satisfied with mediocrity or evil, but to rather satisfy only the health of our soul, to act accordingly, to find the truth no matter what, and to be a part of, as much as you can, a process that's more than yourself. And that's where the idea of the American Revolution is a very important idea for Canadians to think about more seriously, because as Canadians, you're in the United States, I'm in Canada, but despite that, I'm very disappointed when I started looking at the actual Canadian history. Earlier on, we were talking about the Family Compact history, ugly history of Canada as a British deep state operation, which has had great people from time to time who arise and fight against it from within the structures of Canada, but it's very rare. Many of the heroes, the John A. Macdonalds and the people we're told to celebrate are actually some of the worst human beings in the world who did great damage to so much. I mean, and I think the idea of a British subject is somebody who wants to just have a lord, some unelected bureaucrat or elite take care of them for themselves. So to think as little as you need to so that your local mini life is as easy as possible without having to make waves, and you don't ask the deeper questions. And as such, you're a subject. You might think you have a democracy, but you don't. Because you've abrogated your own right to participate in your own destiny at that point. If you don't ask the deeper questions and you don't want to, take risks standing up at a city hall, organizing a political process that might get you in trouble, might make you lose your job or worse.
I just wanted to share with you, to our Canadian American friends, especially our American, someone once explained to me the main difference in mentality between Canadians and Americans. The Americans were the rebellious teenage kid who decides he's moving out, and the Canadian is the 35-year-old kid in the basement that the parents push out.
That's hilarious. Peter, that's really funny. Yeah, that's great.
Well, it says it all. It literally says it all, because Canadians, well, I'm going to share with you some thoughts and then take me down in history. I think that what we thought were our greatest strengths were our weaknesses. And what I mean by that, and as a Canadian, we have health care. They don't take care of themselves in the States. Oh, I'm driving over the border. They're saying, leave your gun. We don't have guns. We're so civilized. We have multiculturalism. We accept everybody. We don't have a history, right? All these things that I held up being so wonderful. Mm-hmm. Now I'm starting to realize they're not so wonderful. There's no culture. If culture happens to be, I'm not American and I'm anti-gun, and we even have like hate speech rules. I was for it when I was a kid, because I was at the brunt of most of it, or my community. But at the same time, I wake up now and I say, no, someone wants to go and say the most hateful things, they should be able to say it, and they shouldn't be censored. And this person here should, be able to have ideas that actually go against it, and the best ideas are going to win. And all these things that I treasured as a Canadian, I realized, oh my God, I got lulled into becoming a prisoner.
Yeah.
And let's go with how that happened, because it starts to me with Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And he was probably like good friends with Saul Alinsky, because Saul Alinsky was against the hippies. He said, you got to get into a suit. You got to go and take over an existing organization and take it from where it is to take it where you want. And in Canada, to me, he's a pivotal point, because that's where healthcare came in. That's where everything was brought to Canada, and even his stepson being in power right now.
Yeah, that's funny how you worded that. Yeah, no, so look, here, the way I tend to approach it is
please,
that these things like universal healthcare are not intrinsically bad things. if you actually have an honest government and a people who is morally developed enough to keep their government accountable. So if you have an actual, functional nation state and a functional citizenry, you can have power used well for the good. To the degree that you actually have a sociopathic death cult taking control of your society and your people in general become dumber and dumber, then any type of central power will be used to enslave and destroy your freedom and your lives. That'll always be the case. So like government in that sense is kind of like a knife. It can be used well to cut your bread and hunt and keep your family alive, and inversely it could stab your neighbor and be used badly. So that's what I would just say on the nature of governmental power. The unfortunate situation in Canada is that when we had a culture that promoted abundance as a moral defining ethic that even influenced economic behavior, when real abundance, and I'm not talking about making letting Wall Street speculators get rich with other people's money through gambling. I don't mean that. That's a fake type of growth. And if people want to call that profit and growth, they're lying or they're stupid. Real growth is the creation of real world abundance, the increased powers of agro-industrial power that allow for also new discoveries, new inventions that allow you to always exceed the limits constraining your population potential. So to the degree that was the case in the 1940s, 50s, even into the 60s and 70s, that ethos was still strong. You don't have a problem so much. You can't really justify the idea that, we have to balance scarcity in healthcare or balance scarcity, there's less to go around in food. So who's going to live and who's going to die, right? You don't have to get into that triage mentality. And unfortunately, I mean, it gets disappointing when you look at the growth of Canada's universal healthcare system. And I got to say that there have been times when it's been used very well, but its origins come from a Fabian Society operation in Canada that was set up in 1931 called the League of Social Reconstruction. And it was self-consciously dubbing itself the Canadian Fabian Society, model of the British Fabian Society that had set up earlier in the 1880s under a bunch of eugenicists and elitist sociopaths masquerading as socialists and pro-labor people like Beatrice Webb, George Bernard Shaw, H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell was for a long time, Lord Mackinder, the founder of modern geopolitics. All of these people were eugenicists. They were Malthusian.
What's Crawley? Wasn't he a member at one point?
He was, as far as I know, he was a participant in Fabian Society discussions. I'm not sure if he was a member. I wouldn't be surprised if he were. But he had his own role to play in the same operation, right? It's just a multi-headed. And so the Canadian Fabian Society was set up by 5 Rhodes Scholars under F.R. Scott, who himself was an Oxford Rhodes Scholar. And these two sort of think tanks worked together very closely throughout the 20th century to basically follow the mandate of Cecil Rhodes. You know Cecil Rhodes?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
So
evil, wanted the British Empire redeveloped.
Yeah, exactly. And to undo, he really also, in his manifesto in 1877, he called for the undoing of the American Revolution, the reabsorption of the rebellious colonies, and a global church of the British Empire with a new breed of civil servants that would be better conditioned, more disciplined than the previous generations, who were a little bit too influenced by, even though Britain was an Anglican, there's a lot of problems with the Anglican forms of Christianity. I mean, having the queen or the crown at the head of the church is a weird thing. But despite that, you read the Bible. And when you read the Bible, sometimes what happens is you activate conscience. You start actually thinking that it matters. And their civil servants throughout the 19th century often wouldn't carry out the type of blood-curdling murder that they were expected to do, whether in India or Ireland. And we've got a lot of cases of civil servants that went off the reservation, so to speak, right, and didn't obey orders. So Cecil Rhodes was part of a reorganization of a weakening British Empire that was trying to problem solve, well, how do you create a new breed of manager? And so the idea of the Rhodes Trust Scholarship Fund became an important part of that. Talent searching for talent outside of the inner bloodlines, basically making it more open for just talent, even if you're from a poor family. If you got talent,
Yeah.
We'll give you the opportunity to be tapped on the shoulder, rise through the levels of initiation in Oxford. If you got what it takes, we'll send you back to your home country with a position of power in government and media.
Isn't the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, isn't she a Rhodes Scholar?
Great example, Christia. Yeah,
exactly. But she might be a bloodline because her grandfather on the maternal side was a very evil man.
Mikhail Chomiak was her grandfather, indeed. Yeah, and he was the lead propaganda figure
working from Hitler
in Ukraine. Yeah, and he was in charge of all of the newspapers and propaganda output of Ukraine under the Bandera and then later Lebed Nazi affiliates in Ukraine during World War II. And he was absorbed into the Anglo-American security complex after World War II was over, as was people like Bandera, like Lebed, who were then deployed as part of Operation Gladio. That was what the CIA and MI6 had done by taking fascists and Nazis and putting them to work carrying out terrorist operations, atrocities, and other things, including in a lot of right-wing governments in South America, which killed their own people en masse, all as part of the war against communism, which is what shaped the terms of the Iron Curtain, the Cold War. It was all based on anything is justified if it stops global communism. And that means working with Nazis. That means everything else. And yeah, Christia's family was a big part of that formula. So the Canadian Rhodes Scholars, the 5 of them that created the Canadian Fabian Society, they created a political party in 1932 that was expected to take control as part of the response to the Great Depression, which was, again, just like today's on.
Which party? What was it? The Social Credit?
No, they were actually not so bad. But no, it was the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation.
Okay.
That became they went through a name change in 1960 and they became known as the NDP under Tommy Douglas. Yeah. And
so it's the NDP.
Yeah, but the thing was, and that's what Pierre Trudeau was originally a member of, was the NDP throughout the 1950s when he was deployed to be a part of the de-Christianization operation in Quebec. That was being run by another leading figure who had a nest of Rhodes Scholars in the Université de Laval named Georges-Henri Lévesque, who is a Huxleyite. He was a follower of Aldous Huxley, who was known in Quebec as the father of sociology. So he brought in sociological studies, gender studies, basically treating human beings like they're just ants, animals in an ecosystem to be evaluated by scientists.
Yeah.
That type of dehumanizing practice, that was him who brought that stuff in as part of the broader education reform to extract any idea of morality or value or creating whole citizens in your education, which was the former ethic of education policy before those reforms took place. And Pierre Trudeau worked in his department at the Université de Laval, and he was an NDP member. So, and a lot of these guys were all NDP, but they became aware at a certain point that there was not enough support in general for communism to take hold in the 1950s. The population didn't support the idea of Malthus of population control because they were still governed by the idea of C.D. Howe, Clarence Decatur Howe, our Minister of Everything, who really modeled his policy off of the best of the Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt experience of building the Avro era, building next generation nuclear power, right? Building up big infrastructure. So the idea of having limits was an alien concept, absurd. And the idea of freedom was very highly valued by the population. So the NDP couldn't get the power to take government controls. And it was around that time in 62, 63 that Pierre-Elliott Trudeau even himself talks about how he chose instead to then join the Liberals. And it was the Liberals, by the time 1963 rolled around, were a very different beast than the 1957 Liberals under C.D. Howe, because C.D. Howe dies in 1957, right? Yves Saint Laurent, he's gone, and Diefenbaker comes in. And during that entire 5-year period between 1957 and 1963, when Kennedy dies and Diefenbaker is ousted, there's a reorganization, what's called a palace coup of the Liberal Party itself. And all of the pro-development C.D. Howe Liberals are extracted. And I've written a lot about this in my book series on the Untold History of Canada. And what you have are the most radical Malthusians who take full control. And it's sort of like you could think of.
Can you just share with our audience, like Methuselah? I always pronounce it wrong. Like they're eugenicists who just believe that there's too many people. Always there's too many people.
Yeah, they're followers of the theories of Thomas Malthus, the British Empire economist, who basically postulated that mathematics gives a governing class the ability to foresee when population levels will exceed food and resources, and thus with these formulas, this is in the 1798 period, he basically said, and this was used by British Empire policy throughout the 19th century. This is what justified the Irish potato famine, which was a concerted effort intentionally made by the British Empire to shut down and destroy the population of Ireland. Same thing for India. So basically the idea was you could act preemptively on the future statistical forecasts by encouraging famines in the present, encourage war to regulate population, encourage lack of sanitation so that disease spreads more easily, so that population is kept in check. These are all things that have been used by the World Bank and the IMF over the past 60 years in Africa or South America, as it has been seen. So these are the people ideologically who were centered in controlling areas around the NDP. And I'm not saying every member of the NDP, because there were a lot of good people. That's why it works, right? It's the inner core above who are the grand strategists. They want to make something attractive for genuine lovers of freedom and labor who are disgusted by the abuses of capitalism to be attracted to something which is going to ultimately destroy them. So that's the way this thing always works. So I'm just saying this because I don't want people to think that I'm attacking you if you're an NDP person or if your grandpa was or something. I'm not doing that. But what happened was you had this virus transplant itself from the NDP into the Liberal Party as a new host. And that transplantation process took about 5 years. And by 1963, with Pearson coming in, and Pearson was a stooge. He was an Oxford-trained stooge of Vincent Massey, who was the head of the Canadian Roundtable. The Roundtable being
I have a question about Pearson, because one of the greatest documents that's never used happens to be the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It was he was part of penning it with Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful document. And he was part of it. And that's the part where I'm a little torn, because I think the lesson is we can all be bought.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, the thing is, words are words and empire is empire. And empire will often use good words to justify a bad agenda. I think that the UN Declaration on Human Rights is good. And I think that the UN Charter is also good. And if they were actually followed, would be core in organizing a truly honest world of cooperation if they were followed. But the problem is the actual structures of power never intended to follow these principles. I think Pearson was not evil. I would not say that. I reserve that word for very few people, because you have to be very smart, very on top of things to qualify, in my mind, for such a characterization. You have to be really self-aware of what you're part of and what you're doing. Pearson was not that.
So based on your qualification, the current PM in Canada is too stupid to be evil. He's just a tool.
Absolutely.
His brother, who I know his half brother, who's on the outs, Kyle Kemper, and he refers to Gerald Butts as Worm Thumb from the Two Towers.
Yeah.
He actually used it in an interview I did with him, because he said, like, all these people dealt with his narcissism and just fed him, saying, like, you are the greatest. Yeah. And
no, dude, honestly, that's exactly it. I love that characterization by Kyle. And Justin is definitely too dumb to be evil. Kind of like George Bush, right? Who could call George Bush? He's too dumb to be evil. but George Bush is a little bit more sympathetic as a person, I think, than Justin,
Yes.
who unfortunately had his whole life really controlled by flatterers, as you said, and his ego, his arrogance were just shaped and sculpted to the point that he has no inner dialogue. He has no ability to self-criticism. So you could see pictures or videos of him at like G7 meetings or G20 meetings, and you have Putin and Angela Merkel and all of the world leaders all sort of talking together, and they're keeping him like 7 feet back, looking all awkward, but still trying to look cool. And he's perfectly aware that he's being filmed. And yet he can come out of those types of experiences thinking, I'm awesome. Like, no self-criticism. So the kid's unfortunate. Jared Butts, like you said, is somebody who is a little bit more, he was positioned around him early on in McGill.
I believe it.
Gerald Butts is more savvy, not himself that bright either, but he's more savvy. He was made the president of the Canadian World Wildlife Fund for a period.
I have a question. I have a question to ask, because this is something, and I'm going to get myself in trouble now.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the green room at CTV, and the former mayor of Toronto, Mayor Miller, he was now taking on that position. And he ran Toronto after Mel Lastman. I'm just starting to think, like, there's certain organizations that maybe we should pay attention to in Canada, people who had affiliation, that we might understand what their leanings are towards. Because I don't believe in conspiracies. Well, I'm using this someone else's statement, but there are no coincidences that these people seem to show up at the same places.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the people, I think if you're training yourself to see with your mind's eye, instead of what some talking head, on corporate media is telling you to think about, some event or some political power in your society, but you're really seeing with your mind's eye with context, right? You're always thinking about, well,
how do you do it? That's the key, because this is the key.
I try to study.
You found all this validation. You find validation, but you actually, is it a thought that there's something wrong, and now I just want to go and get as much information as possible to reconfirm what you're already feeling?
No, I mean, I know that there's, I mean, like I said, I went through my brief moments, like my trauma was in discovering 9/11, right? And that was what sort of set me therapeutically. It was originally a therapeutic thing to write, to share my thoughts on social media, was like writing a blog was like a way to process what I'm getting, what I'm feeling, how I'm hypothesizing what could explain the this historical context of the secret agendas. What do they want? What are they afraid of was a key thing. Like, why do they want to kill people like JFK? What's JFK doing? What's Martin Luther King doing? What are they awakening such that these individuals are threatening such a giant integrated evil power structure, right? And for me, that was what I became more obsessed with in a healthy way, was wanting to read the original writings of great people who tend to get shot. And I started seeing a common thread, which empowered me. I started feeling a lot of inspiration, since they have a real moral, poetic impulse animating their soul, which when you read that and you feel it, it awakens a little bit of that sense inside of you too, So I got that sort of fire, I guess, awoken. This touched on the question I didn't fully answer before, which was,
please.
I stopped talking about politics for about a year and a half, because I didn't have a sense of solutions. And I found that when I was being effective communicating to others about 9/11 or Federal Reserve, whatever, right? When I was effective, I was either demoralizing them or they would think I was crazy. Either way, it was useless. What am I going to do? Like, just lower your energy and make you depressed like I am? I'd rather you be ignorant and just have a happy little like hobbit life, So I resolved to just shut up until I could, unless I were to come to any sense of a more positive, constructive solution. So that was where I originally met on a smoke break after work or during a lunch break. A political table with a small grouping of Canadian activists who were affiliated with an American organization run by Lyndon LaRouche, who recently died in 2019, an American economist. And I found the discourse I was having with these people to be enriching. I found it to be good because they were recognizing the depopulation agenda. I'm talking here like summer 2006. They recognized the depopulation
Yeah.
agenda, as I did. They recognized that there's a conspiracy, as I did. They said things I didn't agree with, but I said, overall, your morals are in the right place. You've identified the right things. Let's hear what else you have to say. So I started looking a little bit more and volunteering increasingly with that organization. And again, they just had one office in Montreal, maybe 8 or 9 members, very tiny. But it was a good experience because it gave me an opportunity to participate in a political process actively. So I wasn't just a consumer. I all of a sudden found myself organizing meetings, organizing events increasingly in Ottawa. So I found myself working working to bring diplomats, ambassadors from different embassies, different members of parliament who were open to listen and receive a briefing to events that we were hosting on the oncoming economic collapse, things like that. And I found that LaRouche had a good sense. He had one consistency about him. So I read as much as I could from him. First I read the slanders. So I was like, okay, who's this guy? And everybody I brought the name LaRouche up to was like, he's a fascist and cult and all of these bad things. And I'm like, whoa, why are you getting all emotional? I'm just asking, like, what do you think? Like, what do you think? Not what is Wikipedia telling you? So there's a lot of slander, and I had to figure out, is it true? If so, it's scary. And so I was like, well, let's read the original. Let's study what the guy did. Let's study his writings. And I did from the 60s onward. And I was like, okay, no, he's consistent. He ran for the presidency 8 times. He got thrown in jail by Robert Mueller and the FBI in the 80s. He made the right enemies, and he became an advisor to several international governments, including in Mexico under Lopez Portillo. I was like, okay, you got street cred. All right, I'll hear you out. And I liked the consistency of the policies towards, I mean, he was talking about the reasons for the systemic economic collapse that was being triggered back in the 70s. He was nailing David Rockefeller and the Trilateral Commission before it was popular. He was doing like Alex Jones before Alex Jones. And I was like, all right. So I had a sense of empowerment, and I was like, okay, I started talking again. And so the act of being able to have an idea of pulling people out of it. And then because I was in Canada, and it was an American organization, it was troublesome because nobody had done the work on figuring out what was the true history of Canada. We were still sort of operating with the common script. And it was myself and a few of my colleagues who felt this way. And we were like, well, let's piece this together. And let's, instead of talking to Canadians, try to just tell them that they must impeach Barack Obama or something, which is, I mean, you're not going to get very far with that. I was like, let's actually try to figure out what we can do. And part of what became my book series and the online magazine, the Canadian Patriot, came about when I was just trying to ask the question or answer the question, how did we progress? How did anything good happen? Right? There's definitely progress from the 1800s to the present. Were there fights to make it happen? Was it just the empire giving it to us? And that's where I started with the story of the social credit figure, W.A.C. Bennett in BC, and how it was that under his 20-year leadership from 1954 to 1952 to 1972, the biggest leaps in progress happened. The building of the biggest dams in Colombia, the Peace River, the biggest, not just hydro, but also industrial growth, train systems, everything. I mean, and then, I was like, okay, well, he was fighting the whole time against these Rhodes Scholars and Malthusians who were embedded both in Ottawa as well as within his own provincial administration, who were sabotaging him every step of the way. He had Power Corporation, the thing that Maurice Strong, founder of the Great Reset, right? He was the head of Power Corps in Quebec, but Power Corps in BC was constantly trying to prevent W.A.C. Bennett from building anything until he nationalized it, forced a takeover, and forced it to behave according to the needs of the people. And the revenue he got by building all of these projects in BC was so great that abundance gave him the ability to give a $100 million loan to Quebec to build our hydroelectric dams and everything else that got us into the 20th century. And it wasn't because of Ottawa. It was only because of the BC-Quebec alliance and also some good people in Ontario at the time. But so all of these different stories and dramas ended up showing up across all of Canada, and that became a series of books. And then that just inspires you. The more you look into that and the more you build off of that living history, the more your ability to analyze current events is increased. And so for me, I'm trying to basically use my mind's eye and help
Right.
other people use their mind's eye too, as best as they can, so that they can make their own judgments on their own without being told what to think by anybody, you know? And it's a very inspiring and empowering story that you want to tell it when you realize how much work has been put into suppressing these truths of our history. You
Right.
want that much more to just put the light on the shadows. So that's sort of what's sort of animating me and keeping me going. And I think overall happy, despite being I'm a melancholic person, but
Yeah.
overall I try to stay positive, and that's why. And I know that people, you know, die historically. There's injustices littered all throughout our history. But if your sense of self is tied to the wealth of your soul, and you're confident that you have an immortal soul made in the image of God, if that's something you're on, then it doesn't really matter as much what happens to your reputation or your physical comfort. It's really,
I agree,
that first and foremost. And then people like what Martin Luther King makes more sense. Like, he knew he was likely going to die, but he did what he did anyway with passion and love.
Well, he has he I think his last public speech,
Yeah.
he said something unbelievable. He said, like, if I was 38, which I am, and this is 3 months before he was assassinated, and you were called to do something moral, and you died at 38. And the other option was you had lived to 92, but you did not act on what you were called to, what you knew was morally. He said your body would just be joining your soul that had died at 38.
Yes.
And I'm writing a book right now, and the book is called The Dot Collectors. And I just want to give you the thesis of it. And this is also why I'm having these conversations. I asked, why did I wake up? And, you know, the moment I think about, well, you know, it jumps back to another moment and another moment and another moment. And why were the things in my life that were significant? So before 9/11 and everything, you sort of had things in your head that you made note of, was disconnected to everything else. But now you get it. And then you have a different perspective than I do. So it's not dot connector, it's dot collectors, because you have to collect those experiences and that wisdom. And then I realized why I was doing it. As I shared with you when we were talking, I grew up with a lot of Holocaust survivors, and some of them who survived, they would say that everybody was going left, and they were going to go left. But because of their experiences and also following what their gut, their soul is telling them, they went right. And then they started trusting going right. And everyone they knew who went left ends up becoming killed, and they end up surviving. And it's almost miraculous. And you shared with that, because one of the things that when you study Adam Smith that no one really focuses on, he talks about the invisible hand. That's God. And we're part of something greater that we're not aware of, because I'm just an amoeba, part of like this human organism. And I don't understand what my purpose is. However, the only purpose that we can do is actually do a check. And I look at what you're doing as validation for what we already know is wrong. And hopefully that sparks someone else to wake up and to have a discussion, and then to form a group, and to say no and not to acquiesce. Because one of the things I think is, there's two thoughts that come to mind, and you and continuing this with me. One, all the leaders in the world are absolute idiots. So my thought is, whoever the puppet masters are controlling this, they're putting in idiots. Because if you listen to an idiot, you're just a bigger idiot. You know, because if you're acquiescing to someone you know is an absolute moron, that just makes you a bigger moron, or makes you a weak person. It completely humiliates you, takes away your power.
Yes.
And that's something that I've come to an understanding. Number two, an understanding that I've come to. So there's, if you look at Justin Trudeau, I'm going to say you're prime minister, because I washed my hands. Like the last 2 years I've been so depressed. Depressed because
He's the Queen's prime minister. That's
Yeah. Well, he's the Queen's prime minister, but he's from your city.
yeah. Sorry about that.
So no, I'm just joking. But to like listen to people who listen to him, or listen to Joe Biden, or listen to Johnson, or listen to Macron, or any of these guys, they're not very are art in New Zealand. Like, they're stupid people. So if you do it, the second thing is they're playing on people who have not come to terms with themselves and had peace with themselves. I spent my last book was on eldership, not seniorship, eldership. And that also is, you have to go and deal with your own shit to be able to come out the other side. Mm-hmm. And the point is, the biggest thing that they're playing on is fear. So people are fearful of dying, fearful of like losing their house, fearful of all this stuff. So what does that mean? It means they don't live. Mm-hmm. And all the sages tell us at the same time, do.
Yeah.
Just go out and do, live. And the way that people have been lulled into sleep is they're playing on their fears, and they don't understand. Giving into your fears is worse than reality. And I'm going to go and quote someone that people are probably not going to be happy with, because I guess I was eclectic. I read Saul Alinsky's 2 books, Reveille for Radicals, the 1946 book, where he admires Hitler because he says every great writer comes from prison, which he was in prison. And then he also said, the fear of something is worse than the reality. So play on people's fears, and they'll give you whatever you want. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's the thing. What's the worst that's going to happen? No. You can take my body, you can take anything, but it's like Martin Luther King said. He said, like, if I die spiritually, I'm dead. It doesn't matter. I'm a walking dead. In Auschwitz, they called them muscle men. You know, these people, their souls had been dead. But they were still
moving.
Like, moving, but they weren't really living.
Yeah.
Like, you're around people who are living. I saw your interview with Michelle Kay.
Oh, Melanie Mel K. Yeah.
Sorry, Mel K. Yeah, Mel K. She's animated.
She's a fun, definitely. She's alive. She's very alive. Yeah.
I don't want to mess with her. She's tearing me apart.
No, I mean, that's it too. You know, like you are what you eat on a physical level. You are who you admire, who you. I mean, spiritually speaking, we're having constant, give and take with people that we choose to place around us. And when you have good people who are animated by their conscience and goodness, you will feed off of that spiritually and become better. And if you're putting yourself in around people who are motivated by something lower, it's gonna be tough to keep that away from your own soul too, whether you know it or not on some level. So you definitely want to try your best to surround yourself with the
I'm gonna plug your books, and I'll tell you why I'm plugging it. Early on, when I got out of university, I became an avid reader. I was looking for some answer, which basically was that inner calm. And I discovered if, like the Buddha, if you sat under the tree long enough, that would come to terms with you had no control. That being said, the reason I read so much, because if you are alone and you're with people who they're okay, or they're not questioning, or they're following the approved narrative, you want to surround yourself in your mind with really smart people. And I found out, for me and most people that I've read about, reading great works were so important, because it not just that they were being introduced to great ideas and causing them to think, they were also insulating themselves from the environment. And no great writer can exist without being first a great reader. So at that point, you want to add to the conversation. That's how I started writing. Mm-hmm. I was teaching at Ryerson University. I hated the textbooks I was teaching. I was just reading because my life had blown up, and I had nothing better to do but work out and read. And after a while, I said, I just want to add to the conversation. I don't want to just be someone who's passive. And from writing, strength comes out because you organize your thoughts and then you can act.
Yes.
And the greatest teachers are not ones who say, I'm so brilliant. They say, I need to get you up to speed as quickly as possible because there's a war and I need you. I'm not going to hide my information. I'm going to share it. And I find it really crazy. People all the time go in. One time I spoke in front of 800 people and I was talking about certain tax solutions. And someone comes out to me later and said, why would you say it? And I said, well, when I was speaking, I only saw maybe a half dozen people writing it down. And tomorrow, if one in, let's say, if I spoke in front of 10,000 people, maybe one person might look at their notes and maybe one in 100,000 might actually do something with those notes. It doesn't really matter, but you're shooting that flare up for other people. And I see this in writing. You probably see this too. When you read something, you could read immediately, if you're a reader, the person wants to tell you how great they are. Yeah, I'm so bright. And there's other people that no, this is important. And I need to share this because I'm really sending a flare to find other people who are actually seeing this as well.
Yeah.
And I would recommend to everyone to read Matt's books. Because if you don't know where you are, how are you going to fix anything? It was Burns. Remember that the documentarian who did the Civil War and baseball and jazz? He says, if you don't know where you are, where you come from, you won't know where you are and you won't know where you're going. And that's why it's so important to start off reading Matt's books and understand, if you're Canadian, where the hell do you live?
I think that you're very, very well spoken, and I couldn't agree more. Including the plugs for my book, I really appreciate that. But yeah, no, I mean, philosophically, that is really it. And I think that the thing you always want to look for when you're reading others, and I mean, read people you disagree with. I mean, that's the most important thing. A lot of people only read the things that they already agree with, or that empower a bias or a prejudice that they're committed to. That's useless. I mean, you want to really read things that you don't know, of opinions that you don't know, that may be wrong, that you disagree with, and wrestle with them, prove that they're wrong. And you'll often find that sometimes there will be content that person says that you disagree with, that you're like, you got a good point there, though I disagree with you on the other stuff. But hold reserve judgment, try to collect as much as you can, and always self-question. And I think that you'll find that there are some authors who are more interested, like you said, you could tell that they care about your mind, because they're not telling you what to think or how great they are or what trivia. They're not giving you an explanation.
They have a question.
They have a question. Yeah, you could see the question that they're making transparent, that makes the answer have value. They're not giving you the answer, they're giving you the question. And that's why I like Plato so much. And people, if they really want to have some healthy mental and spiritual gymnastics, I would say put down social media for a while, spend a few hours each day just reading a Platonic dialogue. Really immerse yourself in the process of dialectic that is being showcased for you, where Plato is, through the voice of Socrates, showcasing through the Gorgias dialogue, through the Theaetetus, through the Apology and the Phaedo, or read the Republic if you want. But the point is, appreciate the process of the paradox formation. How are they testing out, building a theory to answer a problem, and then testing out where that theory breaks down when it is pressed up against the contour of reality, and there's cracks, and those cracks are the paradoxes, and the paradoxes are the seeds of eurekas, of discoveries. And he doesn't give you the answer, which is why it's beautiful. He lets you sit with the splinter, or the splinters, plural, and have you think about, over the coming days after you close that dialogue, how do I resolve that? And that's where the mind is moving. That's where knowledge comes to life. And that's where you'll find that fuel is something.
I want to add something to Plato.
Yeah.
I want to add something. Eric Hoffer.
Eric Hoffer. Okay.
Have you read Eric? You have to read Eric Hoffer. Oh my God. Oh my God. The True Believer.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get in, like, his story is incredible, but it is the greatest brevity book, which most, like, if like I had clients who made their own wine and they would constantly like strain it and make it like 40 proof.
Yeah.
That's how he wrote. And Eisenhower read his book, gave a talk mentioning his book. He was a longshoreman in this is the greatest gift I'm giving you. This book is going to kill it. Like, and anyone, it's a dense book. Like you read a sentence, you said it's a bomb.
Yeah.
And I saw in 1968, and this is like what I love writing. In 1968, he gives an interview on his writing process. Now, he was technically non-educated. He was a longshoreman. He said he would spend a month on a paragraph just to say it right. So when you read something, you can tell whether someone is a craftsperson, and it's important for them to say it right. And it's like, this book, there is no fat. And I just added because right now, but it's very important why his book is powerful, because Eisenhower said this explains the world. And to the day Eisenhower died, he gave out copies of Eric Hoffer's book saying, this is how the world works. And it was like, okay, my thing is, well, this guy might know a few things, right? He gives some pretty interesting speeches and warns us. And that's really what we need to do, because you and I are born into this world. We don't know anything. I remember looking at a picture of my sister's engagement party in 1991, and all the people who were in the picture, they're now dead, including my father. And I'm thinking, well, I'm listening to these people pretending that they know, but what did they really know? And that's the question. Like, just because, someone has authority doesn't mean they know. And it's important. And I truly believe that what you're doing is you're empowering people to trust themselves. Because at the end, what needs to happen is people who trust themselves. And this is just where I'm evolving to, because I don't believe there's an accident. I really don't. I think most people are non-conscious beings, or non-playing characters right now, where they're fed whatever they're given and they repeat it, and they begin with a conclusion, not with a start. So you're living in Montreal, you're Canadian, your parents are so-and-so, this is the label you took on as a religion. That's not the end. It should be the beginning.
Right. And
question that.
No, you're able to put some very complex thoughts into words very effectively. And I can see that you've done a lot of work on the mind, and that's good. And communicating, that's something all people really, we can all have this muscle. We are all born with it, and we can all choose to make it better, but it really is this question of free will. And I think that's the thing, right? With human beings, planets will just move in the orbits that they move in. The bee will do what the bee does. It'll pollinate, it'll make honey, and it'll love bee things, but it won't be able to choose to do other than be a bee, or the planet be a planet. Whereas human beings can choose to be other than what we are endowed to become, right? So we can choose to live like a lower beast, searching for momentary pleasures and be misguided or give up our attachment to the true things, the natural law, and our pursuit and love of that. So when we do that, and all oligarchies, going back to, again, my investigations, anybody who looks at how the ancient cults of Greece, the Apollo at Delphi, and look at how the different cults of the Roman Empire managed their target victims, the masses. It's always by detaching the people, using certain cultural levers and tricks, into thinking that the shadows on the cave are the only reality that there is, and that's it. And to the degree that people do that, and they live for their hedonistic pleasures, the sensualism of the five senses, right, and they let their minds and everything become enslaved to the impulses and impressions of the senses, they step out of the continuity of universal history that they were endowed to play a part in amplifying. Like, we're all amplifiers, the way I see it. Like, history is this flowing wave, and we can all amplify in varying degrees the power of that wave towards creative good, to creative growth. And when you step out of it, when you allow your identity to be pulled into something lower, you no longer have the opportunity to play a role unless you choose to change your identity. And then you could be you're if anything a dampener. like just in wavelengths, right? You can have certain frequencies that dampen a wavelength, a frequency, and some that amplify. And we use that in surgery, use that in engineering. It's in astrophysics. And when human beings are dampeners, unfortunately, it's tragic. They're not able to access their true happiness. The happiness that they get is fleeting. It's based upon, trying to always fill a vessel with more alcohol, more food, more sex, whatever. But you're always creating things that like Plato gets across, right? They're ephemeral. The absence of these things will create more pain. Whereas when you're pursuing the happiness and pleasure of making discoveries and sharing them and seeing the joy in little kids who are becoming, their eyes light up because they've just made a discovery because you helped them. That's something you can't get enough of. You can't be too bloated in discovery or I've had too much wisdom today. I'm feeling stuffed, I'm in pain. You can't do that. It's a different type of, it's incommensurable. So I think to the degree that we can make that hunger, that flame awaken in any way possible with those around us, we're good. We know we're on the right path.
So your core belief is the average human being is much more powerful than they understand. They are.
Oh yeah,
I believe it. I truly believe it. I believe there's an analogy that's used quite a lot in business, but it should be applied everywhere. And this is what I think the people who are pulling the strings understand, and that's probably why they don't want that many of us, because if too many of us wake up, there's way too many to control, right? Like too many foxes or too many wolves or too bears, that it could be overwhelming. It's the analogy of a baby elephant that they tie the leg and they put a stake, and that elephant grows to be massive, and it can just move the stake. And half the time at the circus, they don't even put the stake there. They just have the rope. And the elephant acts as if that rope has so much power. It's like a phantom limb. And they've never questioned or tested. And that's why I'm listening to you talk about your process. At first, something was wrong. You wrote it down, and then you had to speak out on it. You had to take action. And really what it is are you a participant? And not because you are you a participant in your own life? Because the people who I want to show charity towards, like, emotional and whatever to, they are non-participants to their own life. Or they're attached to things. They buy a car, they have a Jaguar, they have a big house, they have a title. They're attached to these things. And I just know that attachment kills, especially when things start falling apart.
Well, that's the thing. It's the New York bankers and the businessmen who jumped out of the windows in the Great Depression. It wasn't your average blue collar worker who necessarily committed suicide. The rates of suicide were higher up when the reality turned inside out during the Great Depression. And so you're right. It's not like having nice things is bad. It's a good thing to have abundance and to have a nice car, and that's fine. But don't let your identity be attached to that, right? All of these good things could be taken away from you tomorrow. And if you don't have a solid grounding in something more durable inside of you, then you will break down, and you don't want that.
I have a question to ask you, because you're living in probably the worst province and the worst country when it came to draconian regulations. And anyone who actually was able to stand up and be centered during this time and not following the herd, to me, is a real hero. It's easy for me to, say I didn't do certain things or whatever, but I had more freedom than what I saw happening and the pressure that was happening in Canada. Do you think it was your investigation and everything that actually tipped your hat and say, there's something up?
Well, I came to sort of my conclusions about what the darker, uglier story of our reality was long before. So I had a lot of time to
Yep.
process that and live with that fact. So I know a lot of people around my same time were struggling with the same information, but they chose, in many cases, to simply say it's too much for me to deal with these facts, and so I'm going to ignore it for a while, just try to live my life. I feel disempowered by the bigness of the question of bankers conspiracies and 9/11. So I'm going to just try to be as good of a local person, think small, think about my friends and family, and not think about the bigger questions. Now, the problem is, for a lot of those people, they were forced under the last 2.5 years to confront something that they'd been running away from. So it was a bit more difficult, and the learning curve is more like stumbly. I found that because I was fortunate enough to decide to get active with the Canadian branch of the LaRouche organization, and I did that for 10 years as a full-time volunteer.
So you had a community. The community gave you strength, so that's something that's important.
It was something which was, I had to pull myself out of my comfort zones, all of my comfortable, and I knew that I needed that because I was, in a sense, I had my addictions, I had my identity was still shaped very much by a lot of the worst elements of the cultural dynamic that I was born into. And so I knew that, okay, I need to change my relationships on every level and put myself into a very uncomfortable position. And so that's where I took the challenge. Somebody said, well, why don't you just join full time? And that means like living without very much money. Cause I mean, revolutionaries these days are not going to make a lot of money. It's purely, fundraising, which is like, $40 food money per week. Not a lot. And I did that for a long time. But it was satisfying. I could sleep soundly at night, right? I knew that I was doing the best possible thing that I could do in the circumstances that I was living in. Maybe again, in hindsight, there's things I could have done differently. But for me, that was like my life. Every day I woke up and I went to sleep, and everything in between was thinking about problem solving and trying to understand the big questions, reading Plato, reading Kepler, reading the battles in science, trying to study things that matter all the time. And so for me, now that when it wasn't traumatic, it was just like, okay, well, I've been talking about the oncoming economic collapse since 2006 for the reasons that they're happening. And here it is now. Okay, it's time to act appropriately. But I got to say, I've been demoralized under the context of COVID, as everybody I think has. And it was uplifting for me to experience firsthand the Freedom Convoy process in February, where I was there on the ground for a while with some friends. Everywhere I went, in all of the videos that you saw, in every city, there was rushes. I think that there was well over a million people in Ottawa. And I mean, the love that I experienced, the commitment towards wanting to take a stand for truth from average people, not intellectually advanced people, just regular farmers, workers, was strong. And then just seeing the videos and talking to people from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, who just came out in droves to support this, was very enlivening for me. And it gave me a sense that Canadians are not as misguided or hopeless as I thought. And this, minority, this radical minority that was being,
I cried like a baby, but I, at that point, just felt like, I like my heart was broken, like completely, like I've got to I got to leave, like I can help people leave who want to leave, but it's like I need to leave because it's that. And then that brought such hope, and about the energy you felt there. I actually, do you know Laura Lynn Taylor Thompson?
Yeah.
So Laura, So I met her at a reawakening in San Diego, like when she was here. And she was telling me, we sat down and she was telling me, because I felt it was her saying, I'm dropping everything, I'm going, that kick-started it. Because she just turns to her husband on camera and says, I'm going. She's speaking to Pat King and says, I'm going. And she drops everything. And her history was, she was very active in the 700 Club. She's very religious. And she told me that the energy that she felt there, she never felt she felt things before, but nothing so powerful. It was almost like a bubble. And I years ago read, and some people might find this woo, but I can go and say that you can find this at, I think it's at Yale. There's something called the random number generator. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
What they do is, I'll send you a link. What they do is they have these random number generators around the world, and they started putting them in 1998. And then something crazy happened. Some situations happen, they start lining up, and it's statistically impossible. It's when something happens in the human herd. And there was a lot of writing about just before 9/11, moments before, like all the numbers started lining up. It didn't make sense. Like something happened, and I don't know whatever you would call this. And I'll send you the link because they have all this data for every day. And I'm trying to look at the data because I just got access to the database for what it was from January 22nd to the day those horsemen came in. Because everybody tells me they couldn't stop smiling. They never had such a natural high in their life. They never felt more love in their life.
Yeah.
And they felt safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you feel something that you never felt before?
Oh yeah. No, I had tears of joy. Yeah, absolutely. And it was no matter where you went. I mean, I was there for the first week and the second week, and every single street was cram-packed with people giving food, feeding the homeless. There was just very positive energy beyond belief, and all with this moral charge all about it, knowing what we know about what's going on in the world, right? And this is inspired. I mean, even the Dutch farmers have not their own, Dutch flag, but they've really they've used the Canadian flag because of that experience as their example when they have gone about their protests to their own.
How beautiful that is.
It's incredible.
We liberated them.
Yeah.
And twice. And now they're following us again, right? Like they're like Canada, out of all places. You know what the joke was? There was this guy I knew. He's the top life insurance salesman in Canada. He mumbled and he wasn't good looking. So he inspired other people. This is what I thought. He inspired it because they would look and say, Herb, he's a putz. He's an idiot. But look, if he can be successful, I got to do it. So he inspired dozens and dozens of really top salespeople in the insurance industry, just on the fact that they would look at him and say, if he can do it, I'm going to do it because that guy's an idiot. I felt when Canada woke up and had that protest, I think the world looked at it and said, if those putzes can go and organize something, we're going to do it because Canadians don't do stuff like that. And for me, it was like, that is like the most dangerous thing. And for the powers that be, because they were telling us not to associate, not to talk, not to pray together, to basically be completely disconnected. I believe that those in the know that we are more powerful because we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not that we are materialists. And I'm sorry for ranting right now, but the biggest thing that happened to me in the last 2 years is I realized that I was nothing I thought I was. I was a materialist, and my religion was materialism. It was all five-sensical.
For you, it's been 2 years of this process?
No, I've been way before. My process, I'm a weird guy. My process has been going on since 1991.
Okay.
But I studied hypnosis for 10 years, like you name it. I'm odd. Typologies, everything. And that's why I'm writing my book right now, because there was so much that I took notice of, but it was good for conversation at dinner. You go, oh, wow, you did that, but it had no practicality. But nothing ever goes to waste. I look now and I say, oh my God, like I read this. Like, for example, I think what we should all be focusing is on Buckminster Fuller's book, The Critical Path, because he's in abundance. He says, well, he was completely against everything that these these eugenicists talked about. He basically said, like, we make cars lighter, we make things more efficient, human beings think, we have more food, all this stuff. He said he was talking about the future. Well, all these people are talking about taking away. They haven't created anything. I had an interesting conversation with Edward Dowd. Do you know Edward Dowd? He's the ex-BlackRock gentleman.
Oh yeah.
So I had a conversation with Edward, and there's something I'm going to cut this out, but there's something I want to bring up to you afterwards that help to get your message out. So Edward said something to me that, I like demographics, and I'm thinking, okay, the demographics are going to crash this year, especially in Canada, because 1958 was like the height of the baby boom, and then no more kids, and all these things are promised. And in China, they got the same problem they do in the West. They don't have anything to support these people, which is bullshit too, because when people were having, like, one income was supporting 5 people back in the 60s, we'll figure it out. But what he said is productivity has stopped since 2008. Yes, they pumped in all this money, but we've been going through a deflationary period. None of the money that's gone into the system has gone into creating anything that we were sharing earlier.
Yep.
Back in the, I guess, 52 to 72 in BC, where it was actually being used for something. It hasn't been used for anything. It's been used to actually siphon it out. Like the money going to take me off YouTube, the money going to the Ukraine is probably being sent somewhere else. The money, like the money that's the checks that are going out. And on top of that, do not take a government check, because now you're going into this universal currency and they've got access to your bank accounts and everything. Like anybody who asks these questions, say, why? And I'm going to leave with this question. The best question that I ask myself now, if I was a devil, what would I do? That changes the entire prism of how I look at everything that's being done. I would do this, and I would do that, and I would do this. I'd understand it. Not that I want to do it, but if you read,
you got to do that. You have to put your mind into the shoes of the devil in a sense, so that you're not going to be a fool. The only way to avoid being a fool is to put yourself through that ugly exercise and get into the cesspool.
It's terrible.
It's uncomfortable, but that's the point of like good drama too, right? Like when you look at Shakespeare's, what is Shakespeare doing in Othello with the character of Iago? What is animating Iago to whisper all of these lies that are inflaming the false passions and egos and insecurities of his target victims, such that they end up destroying each other. And Othello, noble Othello, ends up killing his own beloved wife Desdemona, all because of Iago in Venice. Iago is demonstrating, and what Shakespeare is doing through Iago is demonstrating the nature of Anglo-Venetian intelligence operations as they are actually deployed in courts, in kingdoms, and in nations to get people who have everything in common to be friends, to be allies, to destroy each other. And that's the nature of the game. Yeah. But he's helping you as a citizen enter into the mind of evil so that you can walk out of that experience with a better understanding of the nature of what your nation is a part of, so that you can be a part of discussions, policy discussions that are going to help overcome or navigate through storms that you need to do as a citizen and not a subject. Subjects don't know about evil. They know about
share with you where I have hope. There was a computer game simulation back in the 70s, and it was called Tit for Tat. And there were 3 strategies for it. The first strategy is just attack. So these are the evildoers, just attack, attack, attack. The other one is retreat, be attacked. And the third one was mimic what comes at you. And I've had a lot of time to think about this. And the one that mimicked what happened to it was the strategy that won. So if you attacked me, I attack you. If you were nice to me, I was nice to you. So what does that mean? My last book, I called it The King of Main Street. I didn't call it The King of Bay Street or Wall Street, because it's time for people who have lived good lives to now step forward, to be called upon. if anyone reads the writing of George Washington, he talks about Cincinnatus, who saved the Republic, not the empire, the Republic. And they go to him to become the dictator, and he goes, he puts down a rebellion, and they offer him to be the emperor, and he says no. So he put down the plow, because they found him plowing a 4-acre field, took up the sword, and then puts down the sword and takes up the plow. It's those individuals who realize that they can't sit back, and we're being called upon. And the other thing is, I'd be scared if I were they. And the reason why I would say that is if someone has to go and have a part of them die, to go and, you know, to protect the things they love, they don't have a chance. Someone who's been spoon-fed their entire life, who gets together on jets. I almost laughed when I saw Prince Charles in Scotland telling the rest of us we should cut back.
Oh.
You know, like I just sat there, and he was like friends with that guy Savile or whatever, Jimmy Savile, the child molester pedophile.
Yeah.
And he's telling us, like, this is what we should do. Someone who's rough, a trucker who drives, like, you know, that's something they're scared of. God forbid that real men, and it's because I value women, I have children, but we are expendable. We're expendable. The question I have right now with history is, in the movie The Titanic, they show all these men showing chivalry to let the women and the children on the boats. My question is, how many men or boys or whatever they want to go by would be jumping in to those ships? Because that takes a culture with morals, God, and a compass of what's right and what's wrong. And I think right now this relativity sucks. And Matt, you're doing a great service by giving people a map, and they have to find their own compass.
You too. I mean, I've only recently come into contact with you, but everything
I
am very impressed so far. I've only read your one writing featuring the memorial of your friend Larry. Really moved me deeply, and I'm looking forward to reading your book as well, frankly. So when you do get that thing published, please send me a copy.